Garland Favorito. I received no notice of this. I've only found out through sort of intermediate channels in the last 24 hours, and I would move that he be excluded from testifying based on lack of notice and lack of proper expert procedure.
Yeah.
I'm new to the administrative hearings venue. I did look at the rules. I didn't see anything about that in there. Mr. Favorito is here, and we do plan to call him as a witness. The Attorney General has given me, just handed me within the last 10 minutes, a packet of material concerning Mr. Favorito, so I don't think anybody's too surprised about him. They seem to have a book on it. So I don't see it's any prejudice about me testifying.
Ma'am, can I respond, Mr.
Sure.
Excuse me, Judge? Your Honor, as you know, Rule 19, Part 2, Administrative Rule Procedure 19.2 says notice of service of subpoena shall be made in writing and filed at least 5 days prior to the hearing or deposition at which the attendance of the witness or the production of documents as sought. Ms. Gallegos, even before hiring Mr. Bright, I believe Mr. Bright has been retained relatively recently, but back in December, Ms. Gallegos did avail herself of this Rule 19.2 and file a subpoena for documents. So she was certainly aware of the procedures involved and the requirement to give me notice of witnesses. Secondly, yes, someone can throw together something in 24 hours, but that is not the same as having, especially if the witness is an expert witness. There are specific procedures we go through when we are introducing an expert witness. There's no curriculum vitae that's been provided. There's no publications or list of peer-reviewed articles that Mr. Favorito may be relied upon. There is nothing that they have provided me to establish the proper foundation to qualify him as an expert. They didn't even tell me formally that he was coming. It was something that I found out informally.
Well, first of all, he's not been qualified as an expert. That's up to the court to determine. You'll certainly have an opportunity to voir dire that witness before he is qualified. Mr. Bright, can you indicate if your witness is here voluntarily or if the witness is not?
He's here voluntarily. We did not subpoena him. I will give the prosecutor here a copy of the CD.
The 5-day subpoena rule doesn't obviously apply if there's no subpoena issued. So if he's here voluntarily, you're certainly free to call him and attempt to establish an expert area.
Well, Your Honor, I would just say, as a basic rule of fairness, they knew they were going to call him, whether or not a rule in the Administrative Rules of Procedure requires it, to call someone and be having and testifying to his curriculum vitae in terms of his experience and qualifications in this area, to not produce me either the name of the witness or the CV ahead of time. It's just unfair, and it makes it very difficult.
I would agree that it's unfair that the state of Georgia doesn't have discovery at all as it relates to administrative procedure, so there is no requirement at the other side. Unfortunately, in Georgia, unless there's a pretrial order entered, which I don't believe there was in this case. What was it?
Well, there wasn't a pretrial order entered. Again, we're working in a situation that is quickly changing. I didn't even know until I got to Valdosta yesterday and found a subpoena for another witness that Mr. Bright was even retained in this case. I had no prior formal notification of that. I find out yesterday again that this witness is coming, and yes, there is no rule that requires it, but we still operate in a proceeding in which we're trying to be fair and impartial to both sides. I'm simply making the argument that I believe that to allow this witness, who was not noticed, who is not a fact witness, so I could not have come in and known that perhaps he would come testify because he wasn't in the investigation at all. Who's going to come in, who has now just handed me, although I handed Mr. Bright documents 20 minutes ago when he walked in, he only hands me the curriculum vitae after I make this motion, and to expect me to read this, digest it, and be able to effectively cross-examine someone, like I said, that is not giving the state election board its It's fair and impartial hearing.
You know, if you want to quibble, the CV, which I gave her 10 or 15, 20 minutes after she ended this, but it's 2 pages long. This is I don't know, 40 pages or so that she handed me, so I mean, we kind of have to overlook some of these things and get on to the merits of the case.
So either party going to invoke the rule of sequestration as it relates to witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any of the witnesses that are intending to testify, if you step outside, you'll be called in when it's your turn. Any witnesses?
Just leave them there. We'll have them. Garland, you need to leave.
Here's my copy.
Remember, are you calling any expert witnesses?
I'm not expecting to designate anyone as an expert.
Any opening statements before we get started?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
I might just stand right here. Maybe I can use this one. Good morning.
Good morning.
Your Honor, I represent the State Elections Board in this case against Ms. Laura Gallegos. Ms. Laura Gallegos was an election technician for the Lowndes County Board of Elections for approximately 8 years until her employment was terminated at the end of December 2008. As an election technician, she was sworn into office, she signed an oath, and she was, by statute, designated the duties of testing and certifying the machines, the election machines for the elections. In September of 2008, Ms. Gallegos was assigned that duty running up to the November 4th, 2008 election. She was assigned specifically the duty of testing the election machines to be used in the early and absentee voting precinct. I believe there were about 32 machines. Now, voting machines are complex instruments which require a very specific set of steps in order to test them accurately. If the machines aren't tested accurately, things like lack of calibration occur, so that you, as the voter, you push the button, you want to vote for your party, and when the end screen comes up, that vote has not, it does not show that you voted the way you touched your screen. So calibration is one very important part of testing your machine. So the vote the voter makes actually gets recorded. There are something like 93 steps to test an election machine, and Ms. Gallegos has skipped, I believe, about 50 of those steps. This was in September of 2008. Additionally, there's paperwork you have to fill out to show that you have actually done what you're supposed to do on these machines. And correspondingly, Ms. Gallegos did not fill out the paperwork appropriately. In fact, she was fraudulent in some of the statements on the paperwork were fraudulent. But be that as may, things were that was done in September of 2008. No votes were taken. Nothing was caught. Fast forward to the night of November 4th, 2008. Now, unlike what we see on TV when we watch Wolf Blitzer and John King and Katie Couric call elections on election night, the reality on the ground in the election Board of Elections in all these counties around the country is that their votes aren't completely counted by 11 o'clock when Wolf Blitzer has declared the new president of the United States. They have to count provisional ballots. They have to count UOCAVA ballots. They have to go through and reconcile lists of votes with lists of people who came in and actually voted. So despite the fact that the nation knew who our next president was by 11 o'clock that night, all these little boards all over the country had not made final certification. And in fact, it takes some time before you do that, as for example, the recount in the Al Franken Senate race at the same time shows. The way the machines work, you have your hard standing machines, and then you have this, which is a memory card. You insert your memory card into your machine, you do your testing. Your memory card should print out a tape which shows that the testing was done and that everything is copacetic, for lack of a better word. That's done in September, before the election. On election night, you have now resubmitted these cards into the machines. You've taken the actual votes. And now it's time to get the votes from this card into the server, known as the GEM server, which is what the state accumulates the votes, and that's how we get to see the little running screens on our televisions at the bottom of the screen every night. When Ms. Gallegos failed to completely test all the machines in September, there was one machine that didn't work. It was machine number 17. Now, Ms. Gallegos did what she was supposed to do with the machine, and she set it aside to be repaired. She did not do what she was supposed to do with the card. What she was supposed to do with the card was get a new machine, insert the card into the new machine, and match the card up with the new machine. Instead, she put this card, not this card, but the card that had gone with the machine that didn't work, it's card number 17, she put it aside. Because she had not done the testing, there were 947 test votes on that card that night. Fast forward again to November 4th, 2008. Because she had not taken card 17 and assigned it to a new machine, the card histories understood that card 17 was still associated with this bad machine. And when all the other cards were uploaded into the server to produce the voting results for Lowndes County on November 4th, 2008, card 17 was missing. The GEM server recognized there was a missing card because, as our witnesses will testify, everything is keeping records, everything is double checking everything else. So all the machines are assigned to all the cards, we have to upload every single card. So the machine, the GEM server, told the Lowndes County Board of Elections that there was a card missing. There was a search made for the card. It was found. Card number 17 was found. Card 17 was uploaded into the GEM server. A couple weeks later, now we're starting to reconcile. Now the state has done its paperwork. We've counted our provisional ballots. Lowndes County has counted their provisional ballots. And the state produces what's called, it's a chart, and it shows the statement of votes cast versus the number of people who said, yes, I'm voting in this election. And there was a big discrepancy, almost 1,000 vote discrepancy in Lowndes County. Typically, there will be some discrepancy, but 1,000 votes is bigger than what you typically see. So an investigation was begun. And it was that investigation to figure out why there was this discrepancy that led the investigators, Steve McBrayer from the Secretary of State's office, James Long from Kennesaw University, the Center for Elections, and Deb Cox, the supervisor at the Lowndes County Board of Elections. It was that investigation to try to fix a discrepancy which led them to find the violations that occurred back in September. There is no evidence in this case that Ms. Gallegos committed any violations on the night of election night. If we were here to talk about why card 17 got put into the GEM server, we wouldn't have a case, because that's not what this case is about. This case is about what happened in September. It's about the failure to test these machines. It's about the failure to create the proper paperwork. It's about the reason why this matters. And it's about the fact that Ms. Gallegos abrogated her duties, her statutory duties, her rule duties to which she had taken an oath, and is in violation therefore. So, the State Election Board believes at the end of this hearing, you will find that Ms. Gallegos is in violation of these rules, is in violation of her, of the statutes, and you will find for the State Election Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel.
Please forward. The first question that must be answered in this argument's case is whether or not Laura Gallegos is subject to the statute under which she's being charged, and that is 21-2-379.7B. That is what the state's papers that charge her and ask for civil penalties and other sanctions. That's what they say they're charging her under. And we will point out, and we'll point out again, that statute does not impose an obligation on a clerk, or even if you call it a technician, it does impose an obligation on the superintendent of elections to do certain things. There is a provision that allows custodians of elections to be appointed by the superintendent. Those custodians can only be appointed with the consent of the governing authority, which is not done here. They're entitled to be compensated by the governing authority, which was not paid. She did not get anything like that. They are required to take an oath prescribed by the Secretary of State, which she was never asked to take. And we expect to show you that she was never called a custodian, told she was a custodian, or took any oath or got any pay. She started in this office as a clerk, file clerk, answered the phone, file papers. She's got a little training, and they changed her title to technician. But our case is going to be, in the first instance, that 21-2-379.7B does not allow the sanctioning of a technician, particularly for something that, well, we'll describe it as we go through. So that's the first question, is what is her capacity, and is she subject to the sanctions of the state election code? We also expect to show you
that I assume that your argument would be that if she was not properly appointed, then the ultimate obligation would be back to the superintendent.
exactly.
Rather than her.
Yes, Your Honor.
If the answer is no, then we're finished. Is that your argument?
I'm sorry.
If the answer is no, then we're finished. Is that your argument?
Yes, sir. It is. The sanction statute specifically allows sanctions only for violations of the elections code. And if the elections code does not apply, does not impose obligations on her, then our contention is she cannot be sanctioned. In September, according to her instructions, and she works here along with another technician known as Gina Lofton. She and Gina Lofton were instructed to test these machines. Now, it is said that she didn't provide the proper testing. We point out in that regard that the elections code does not provide for any criterion for testing. It simply says that the superintendent, which is not this lady, that the superintendent will cause a thorough testing to be made. It does not have any criterion for testing. She did perform testing, and if allowed, we will present testimony through Mr. Favorito that the testing that she performed was adequate under the Georgia election code. As a matter of fact, the testing found that one of the machines was deficient, which is where this thing all started. She found out that this machine was deficient, and by running this test card in the machine, And that test card contained, I believe I've got the number right, 947 test votes. Well, the machine wouldn't take it. Every time she put it in, it just blacked out the monitor. So she reported that to the superintendent, and was told to send it off for repairs, which she did. She was also told to put the card in the GMS room, which is I've never seen it, but it's apparently a separate room where some of this equipment was kept. And she put a sticky note on the card that said, "Bad card," and put it in there. All of what she did according to her instructions. Now, the election comes along, and she, at the time of the election and at the time of the tabulation, is nowhere near the Board of Elections office. She's at one of the precincts, the First Christian Church, where they had a big crowd. She was there handling that. It had nothing to do with the tabulation. Somebody in the office takes this memory card with the 947 test votes on it, which should not have been able to be plugged in to the actual votes. But somehow, we don't know how, because she didn't do it. Somebody overrode the system, or the system misfunctioned, or something happened. And they were able to put in test votes to look like real votes, which made the thing out of balance by 947 votes, which is exactly what was found. Well, is there a way to find that out? To me, the case is very simple, and I may be oversimplifying it because I have a very elementary understanding of the elections and these computers. But to me, it's a simple thing. The machines produce a list and a total of everybody who, signed the card and voted, got the sticker. They also present a total of the number of votes that the machines record. Those should match. In this case, they were out by, you guessed it, 947 votes, which is the same thing that's on card number 17. The statute requires the superintendent to make that test. I don't think that was done here. The statute requires the local board to make that comparison. Notwithstanding those requirements, these results, out of balance, 947 votes, were certified up to the State Board of Elections, where the State Board, I think just about as soon as they opened the package, did do the comparison, realized the discrepancy, and that's how this all came about. The way she tested the machine, we expect to show you, really had nothing to do with the problem. What caused the problem is that somebody picked up a card that says "bad card" and insisted on putting it in anyway, and created the imbalance while she was somewhere else performing other duties. It's from the beginning, it struck me as strange that a woman in her position, which is right near the bottom of the totem pole, should be blamed for what seems to be a systemic problem in this office. And I think when we analyze it, we will find that she should not be blamed for that. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, John. Rumble, anything further?
We would call a first witness.
Let me ask before we do you agree with Mr. Bright that if in fact Ms. Gallegos is not in her position covered by the statute, then the state election board would not have jurisdiction over her?
I would not, Your Honor. I would point you to 21-584, refusal or failure of manager to administer oath to pool officer. And it talks about if the manager fails to administer the oath, or if the technician acts without having the correct oath, then the person who has dropped the ball, as it were, in the oath department is guilty of a misdemeanor. That is the remedy for a breakdown with the oath. But the language of the statute, as Mr. Bright pointed out, there's 379.6, which allows a supervisor to appoint custodians, and the supervisor, the custodian must take an oath. That's what that statute says. He alluded to it in his opening. And then once that custodian has taken that oath, then they are responsible for taking the machines. They're responsible for 379.7, which he alluded to, as well as the rules, which are part of your statement of matters asserted package, which the state elections board, those are covered too. You are in violation of both statutes and rules.
Well,
and if you,
let me ask you this then.
Okay.
If the position of Ms. Gallegos is that she was never appointed as a custodian in the DR units, then she still wouldn't be covered, would she?
well, I mean, we have evidence to present. That's a question of fact.
Right. So that's what I'm asking you. I'm assuming you are going to present some evidence that the superintendent was authorized by the county and did in fact partner, et cetera,
Yes.
under 379.6.
Yes. Yes. I would also state that the rules speak, unlike the statute, the rules, and they're in your package. They do discuss the custodian specifically, as opposed to sort of jumping between statutes and saying, okay, we appointed her under this statute, so now she's subject to this statute. The rules include the custodian specifically in their language.
You call your first witness?
Yes. James Long.
James Long.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Good morning. Can you state your name, please?
My name is James Robert Long.
And Mr. Long, where do you work currently?
I work for the U.S. Election Assistance Commission out of Washington, D.C.
Can you tell us what the U.S. Election Assistance Commission does?
Yes, ma'am. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission is responsible for federal certification over voting equipment. Manufacturers submit equipment to laboratories. The EAC oversees the laboratories and the certification of those units. They are also responsible for distribution of HAVA funds.
Okay. What's a HAVA?
The Help America Vote Act that was passed in 2002 allotted a certain amount of money to each state for voting equipment improvement, voting practice improvement, and we manage that. We manage the state contracts that apply to HAVA.
What are your duties at the, can I call it the EAC?
Yes.
What are your duties at the EAC?
I'm a computer engineer. I oversee different projects and work with the labs. Labs submit reports on the testing that they're doing with the units, and I review those reports. I consult with other technical people throughout the country and pretty much certify voting equipment.
Okay, can you give us an example of the projects that you review and the reports you generate, just so we have a more specific, concrete understanding of what you're doing?
Yes, ma'am. recently worked on the Unison project, which was actually federally certified this week.
Okay, stop right there. Unison, what's Unison?
Unison is the name of a manufacturer who manufactures voting equipment out of San Diego.
And what does federally certifying election equipment mean?
To federally certify, or to become federally certified, you have to pass what is the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines. These were set up, or these were requested to be set up by Congress as part of HADA, which is in 2002 that was passed. The EAC was formed from HADA as well to come up with these standards for voting equipment.
So, did you certify this Unison system?
I was the project lead on it. I was the person who interfaced with the lab directly. It's certified by the executive director officially.
Did you recommend certification?
I did.
Okay. What, if you could state just kind of briefly, what does it take to certify election equipment at the EAC?
Essentially, it takes approximately 6 months to even 2 years sometimes to get through federal certification. Each piece of equipment must pass every standard. I think there's a little over 1,000 standards that they have to meet that range from usability, accessibility, hardware, accuracy, stuff of that relative nature.
Are you the person that's going through those 1,000 standards?
Yes.
Now, prior to working, how long have you worked for the EAC?
Almost a year.
Prior to working for the EAC, what did you do?
I worked for the state of Georgia at the Center for Election Center for 5 years.
Okay, what's the Center for Elections?
The Center for Elections is responsible for creating ballots, creating the ballot databases, upgrading the equipment, state certification of the equipment that Georgia uses for voting. They oversee all the technical support, training, and any type of troubleshooting or election day issues, or even any type of equipment issue they have.
Okay. And what was your job? What were your job duties there?
I was assistant administrator. I did the technical aspects with the servers, the voting equipment, tested the voting equipment and servers, and repaired as necessary.
How many systems administrators did Kennesaw or the Center for Elections have?
There were 2.
Now, Mr. Long, did you receive a call from someone at the Lowndes County Board of Elections after the 2008 election?
Yes.
Okay. Who did you receive a call from?
At the time, I did not remember the name, but I did find out when I arrived in Lowndes County that it was a boy.
Okay. So, can you tell us about this first phone call with, we'll refer to her as Ms. Gallegos. Can you tell us about this first phone call with Ms. Gallegos? Do you remember when it was?
It was shortly after the November election, so it was before certification, so it was between the Tuesday of the election and the following Friday.
Okay. So what do you mean when you say before certification?
All election results are considered unofficial until the Friday after the election, when all the canvassing is done. Canvassing is the process of making sure that your vote totals match the number of people that voted, make sure that all your provisional ballots have been either accepted or rejected. All UA columns or overseas military ballots or overseas citizens ballots have been received and counted, and that's usually the Friday following the election.
Okay, so when you received this call from Ms. Gallegos, tell us about that conversation.
Ms. Gallegos called and said that there were issues uploading a memory card into the GEM server. The GEM server is a server that does the tabulation and contains the databases, how you load the memory cards that go into the election equipment that allows you to vote.
Okay. I'm going to show you what I've marked as State Exhibit Board Demonstrative Exhibit 1. Do you recognize Demonstrative Exhibit 1?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell the court what Demonstrative Exhibit 1 is?
It is a PCM CIA memory card. It is what The ballot is transferred from the server and then placed into a voting unit, a DRE, which is a touchscreen voting unit in Georgia. That allows the ballot to be presented and to record the votes. That card is then removed from that machine and uploaded into the GEM server for tabulation.
Now, this, when the cards are uploaded into the GEM server, do they look like this, or do they have anything on them?
They do not look like that. There is a receipt that is printed out by the machine that you download from that is taped to that card. That receipt identifies that card as to what precinct and what card number it belongs to.
Okay. So presumably this doesn't have a receipt on it.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so this is, presumably, there are no votes on this card.
Presumably.
Okay. So you stated that when Ms. Gallegos called you, she was having trouble uploading something like this, Demonstrative Exhibit 1, which should have had a receipt on it.
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about that conversation?
Essentially, what we do at the center is we troubleshoot the issue. So I started down the most normal causes of issues, making sure that the machine is connected, that it's actually talking to the server. After that was established, I asked her to try to upload the machine and tell me the error messages that it presented. From those error messages, I was able to see that it was a actually non-live election, which means that it was in pre-election mode. It had never been set for election. And therefore the machine was indicating such.
So what did you tell Ms. Gallegos to do when she figured out that it was in pre-election mode?
I asked her if the machine if the card had in fact been voted on election night, because that would be an issue. Before we went any further, I wanted to make sure, were there supposed to be votes on this card? She verified there's a recap list that shows where the cards were assigned. And she said that the card was used in an election. And so I asked her...
No, wait, let me stop you there. You just told me that you said it was in pre-election mode, and now you're telling me that she said it had been voted on.
According to the paperwork, it had been voted on.
She's saying that?
Yes.
Okay, did that make sense to what you thought that it was in pre-election mode?
It did not make sense at the moment, but there are issues that come up, and I was trying to resolve those issues.
Okay, so go on. Okay. Did you have an understanding from your conversation with her to what she was referring that would lead her to believe that this card had been voted on?
Yes, there's paperwork that accompanies all aspects of the voting process, from LNA, which is logic and accuracy, which is what you do prior to an election. It's the testing of the equipment. So there's paperwork of where you assign the cards and what machine they're in. And then there's recap sheets from the election that show the machines and the totals that were on those machines. The machine in question was marked as one that had been voted on.
These were already provided to you, or provided to Ms. Gallegos. Okay. Mr. Long, I'm handing you what's been marked as SEB Exhibit 1, SEB Exhibit 2, and SEB Exhibit 3. Okay. Can you tell me what SEB Exhibit 1 is?
Exhibit 1 is what's considered the custodian certificate form. This form is filled out by the person that is doing the assignment of the memory card. A memory card, as an individual, does not have any specific nature to it. When it's downloaded, it can be placed into any machine. So there are no set machines for, absentee card 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how many you have. So what this sheet allows you to do is take the serial number from the machine that you're going to place it in, and also record the number of the card. All cards start at 0. So the first machine you take, you'll write the serial number machine and you're placing card 0 in. And then there's a checklist of all the steps that you need to go through before you set the machine for election, which would put it into a mode in which it's ready to collect votes.
Okay, can you describe State Election Board Exhibit 2?
Yes, ma'am. Number 2 is a recap sheet from this is filled out at, this one in particular would be filled out actually at their absentee voting location. So what it says is the number of the DRE unit, which is the touchscreen unit, the number of the seal. All units are sealed every night if you're an absentee, so there's a plastic tamper evidence seal. So you record the number of votes on the machine, and then the serial number of the seal that you're using to close the machine with, and the count number.
Okay, and what is SEB Exhibit 3?
3 is an absentee ballot recap. This is a recap sheet showing the number of ballots that were issued and their counts. So in section A, you see this is accounting for optical scan absentee ballots and applications. So these are how many absentee ballots were sent out or how many applications for absentee were gathered. Section B is accounting for the TS absentee. There's a difference between your optical scanning ballot, which is a paper ballot, versus your touchscreen ballot, which is electronic. And then C is just the totals of both of those together.
So your understanding as you're having this conversation with her is she's looking at those documents and she's telling you that there were actually votes, election votes, real votes on that card 17.
That's correct. It would have been one of the recap machines from that machine.
Okay. All right. Continue on with the conversation with Ms. Gallegos. What happened next?
I instructed her to place the card into the machine and just turn on the machine and let's see where the machine comes up to. The machine came up into pre-election mode with 940 something votes. I don't recall that exact number. I instructed her that it was in pre-election mode and that it wasn't set for election. I asked her to verify that it was actually used in election. She went to the work and said it was used in election, that there were supposed to be, from my memory, approximately 400 something votes on it. So at that moment, I thought that there was an issue with the card. Maybe the card had gotten mixed up or something along that nature. So I asked her to retrieve the machine that was actually voted on. That machine will allow you to go into the internal log and pull the votes. They're stored in 3 different places. They're stored on the card and then 2 internal memory spots inside of the DRE. So with the machine, we can actually pull what the machine recorded and place it on the card to upload. So I instructed her to get the machine and we go through what's called an archive process. There's set instructions of how to get into the archive, see the elections that machine has been through, and then restore those. There was no active data in the archive, so the machine was never used in an election. So I simply informed her that it was not used in an election and that it should just be uploaded as a 0 card, meaning a card that was not used, but all cards have to be accounted for. Even if you do not use them, you upload them as zeros.
What happened when she, well, so telling her that, I'm sorry, what happened then?
She followed the instructions. We restored the card from the archive just to make sure that there was no data on it. There was none. So we set the unit for election, which is the proper process, and then ended the election immediately with no votes cast. That card was then uploaded into the machine and the election could be closed out.
So what does it mean to go from 947 votes in pre-election mode to 0 votes in election mode? To those of us who don't really do elections every day.
The 900 and some odd votes in pre-election mode are not real. They are test data. There is a button and there's instructions for running this test data. You press the button and it's called an automatic LNA, automatic logic and accuracy. it will vote each position of the ballot in a certain pattern. So depending on the number of candidates and the ballot layout, it will go through, X amount of ballots. It's pretty much 1 for 1, 2 for 2, 3 for 3, repeated through all the ballot styles. So eventually it came up to 940, whatever that algorithm was. You know that ahead of time, so that when you're doing LNA, you know that that's the number you should come up with, and these are the results you should come up with. And you verify that the machine is working properly. So that was the data that was on the machine. That was the only totals that were on the machine. The election data is actually considered what's live data. That's it was set in a live election mode. It was ready to gather an actual elector's vote. And then when you end the election, it turns that into what's called post-election. And that's the results of all of the elector's votes. And that is what is uploaded into the machine.
Into which machine?
Into the gem server, which is the tabulating machine.
Okay. Now, once you got off the phone with Ms. Gallegos that day, were you concerned about things?
I was not concerned.
Okay. Why not?
Because all election results are unofficial until the Friday of the certification. It is not uncommon for human error to happen throughout election day. Sometimes provisional ballots come in, late from the precinct. Sometimes UOCAVA votes don't make it into the Friday, which are your overseas ballots from the military. So elections are never certified until the end. So you have to that Friday to complete your canvassing, which once again is going back and verifying that all your totals match and that you have the correct vote totals on that Friday. Everything up to that point is unofficial, so it did not concern me that those votes were removed. It did not change any race outcomes because it was LNA data, it's voted in a pattern. The odds of it changing something were very slim, especially in a large election.
Now, did you ever go down to Loudoun County?
Yes, I received a phone call after the canvassing had completed and certification had been completed that Friday from Deb Cox, who's the election supervisor for Loudoun County.
Okay, and what happened on that? Well, let's see. Was she calling you about these 947 votes?
She was calling me because she had concerns over the errors that had shown up on election night. There were a couple of errors that showed up on the gem server, and that to account for these votes.
So what happened next?
I spoke with my supervisor, Merle King, and informed him of the situation, and he told me to go down and see what I could figure out.
What happened when you went down to the Loudoun County Board of Elections?
I started off by examining the gem server. I had a list of the errors in which Deb Cox had reported. They were not related to the election. They were actually related to one of the peripherals that was attached to the server. They used modems, and one of the modems had malfunctioned on election night and was sending bad information to the server. So that's where those errors were coming from. As far as the other half that Deb had asked me to look into and to trace down was those votes and see what happened, when did they get into the server, where did they come from, that sort of information. So I started with the GEM's server log. It's a log of all actions taken on the GEM's database. From that, I determined that on election night, the card was uploaded. Those 940 votes were uploaded, and that they belong to machine number 17.
Let me stop you there.
Yes.
At this point, are you concerned that there's something more to this situation than a simple troubleshooting? Are you more concerned than you were on the phone with Ms. Gallegos?
Not
Objection
really.
is speculative and irrelevant.
Your Honor, I'm asking for his opinion and his feelings at the time. He's a fact witness and he's welcome to testify to them.
And that's why we say it's irrelevant. His feelings, what he saw, what he found.
Actually, it is relevant, Your Honor, because we need to establish when it becomes, at what point this goes from being almost a paperwork issue to becoming something more serious and something that needed more analysis.
But I don't think he's the one to say that. I think you're the one to say that.
Oh,
Okay, Mr. Long, let me kind of rephrase. Was there a point at which you, with your training and experience, became more concerned about the situation in Loudoun County than you had been on the phone with Ms. Gallegos?
Yes.
Okay, what was that point?
When I noticed that the card itself was uploaded separately from all of the rest of the absentee cards.
Okay,
So usually absentee memory cards are the first to be uploaded on election night because they are already closed out the Friday before an election. So they are already available for upload. As soon as 7 o'clock hits, which is the close of the polls, the election superintendent is allowed to upload those. All the other ones were uploaded on election night, and this one was uploaded late into the night, in between a couple of other precincts.
okay. How did you discover that there was a difference when this card number 17 was uploaded?
Excuse me?
How did you figure out there was a time difference when card 17 was uploaded?
It is in the gym server log.
Okay.
Each upload is, or each action taken on the database is recorded into the log.
Okay. I'm going to mark this as SEV Exhibit 4.
You mind telling me which part of this I'm supposed to look at?
Well, this is I mean, we'll go through that with him. I'm just showing you what I'm going to hand to him. You recognize SEB Exhibit 4?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what is SEB Exhibit 4?
This is a gym's server log. This is a log of all of the actions taken against the database on election night.
Okay, what is the date of that gem server log?
11/4/2008.
Your Honor, at this time I would like to move SEB Exhibit 4 into evidence.
any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
For purposes of the record, can you just briefly go through SEB 4 and tell the judge, so that if he wants to review this later, how all those lines and numbers told you that card number 17 had been uploaded independently?
Essentially, if you read the log, a connection closed means that there was a successful upload, or that there was a successful disconnect from the machine. So the machine that you're using to upload the memory card into the server will connect, upload the results, and then disconnect from the computer. So all these logs that you see where it says that it connected and closed, that is that operation. Upload vCenter, which is vote center, and then it has an ID. Every vote center has an ID. And then it shows a machine number. That's the number of the card that matches the machine for the paperwork. It will show what it did and what the amount of ballots was and the name of the precinct. If you read through the list is full of precincts that had voted that day. You have Abundant Life, Mount Olive Church. All these are names of precincts.
In Lowndes County?
In Lowndes County. Towards the bottom, you will see that by itself a card was uploaded, and it says absentee, and it is the machine 17, and the ballots uploaded were 947. So it was at this point where I decided to go investigate that machine and see what had happened.
How did you go and investigate that machine?
I requested the machine be brought in from the warehouse, which is within their same building. The machine was brought in, and I wanted to examine the memory card and the machine and check the audit logs on those machines.
Did you look at the paperwork, the state exhibits, or state election board exhibits 1, 2, and 3?
Yes. When I received the machine and the logs were not in good shape to to
Okay.
state that. They were not easily to follow. The
Okay.
timestamps on them were incorrect.
we're gonna go through that a little bit more specifically. I'd like you to start with State Election Board Exhibit 1, which I think we identified as the custodian certification form for AccuVote TS, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, before we talk about what was wrong with the form, I would like you to tell me if the form as it is right now, if that is the version of the form you first saw when you came to Lowndes County that day.
It is not.
Okay. What did you see on that form?
On this form, none of the signatures were here. The only things present were the serial numbers for the machines, the card numbers, and the seal numbers that were placed on them. And I do believe up here in the corner, the AB, which stands for absentee vote. Most of this other documentation was not here.
What about these signature, or not signatures, but these initials down by technician?
They were not. None of this was present.
What about I did not LNA AB machines Gina Lofton?
It was not.
Okay, so all we had were the serial numbers, the card numbers, and the seal numbers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What happened when you saw that document?
Well, it makes my job more difficult. Not having complete information like this makes it more difficult.
Let me stop you there. Let me ask the question a different way. How did that document get to be in the form it is now?
Since I could not follow it, I requested that someone straighten this out, because at that point, it's still thinking it's just a paperwork issue. So I'm like, we need to know what happened here so that I can find out why these votes got uploaded the way that they did. So this form was taken from me, and then it was returned with more of this information on it.
So what you see now, is that is that the document you saw later that day at Lowndes County?
It is.
Okay. At this time, I would like to admit State Election Board Exhibit 1 into evidence.
No check.
It's a minute.
Okay, now let's back up a little bit. Tell me why it was so difficult to understand this form if all you had was the serial number, the card number, and the seal number.
Essentially, the machine that was assigned card 17, which was the one that was uploaded on election night. So this is the one that I would come to see what machine it belonged to. When I pulled that machine was not the one that the card was placed into. The logs did not match. So at that point, I'm trying to figure out what happened and why was this card not the one that was used. So I started to inquire about it, and I found out that this machine was actually sent for repair, that machine was not used in the election. So the numbers past this point are all incorrect. They do not match up. They would be off by 1.
Okay, so does the addition of the initials and the date and some of the other stuff we discussed that was added when you arrived at Lowndes County, does that change? Does that make it easier for you to figure out that form?
No, those are just placed there because they're responsible for being there.
Okay. Was there on that certification form, were the serial numbers for each DRE unit? Are they on that certification form?
They are.
Are they correct?
The serial numbers are correct. The cards that went into them are incorrect.
Is that a complete list of all the serial numbers that were used?
I'm unsure. I don't know how they used that.
Okay. Well, is that a complete list of all the serial numbers of all the machines?
I'm not sure of the question.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Does the form, the certification form, show the number on the system counter of the DRE unit?
It does not.
Does the certification form show the number on the seal with which each DRE unit is sealed?
It does.
And does the certification form show that the election counter and each vote register on this unit was set at 0?
It does not.
Okay. Does it have did it have a precinct label on it when you first looked at that document?
To my recollection, it did. It belonged to the absentee.
Okay, so that was there when you first saw it. That was not added later.
To my recollection.
Now, it seems like there's a whole bunch of other columns on this form, and there's no documentation as to those columns. Can you tell us what those columns are and why they're important?
The purpose of these columns is to assist the person or the custodian that is doing the testing to make sure that all aspects of the test are completed. These tests and this process was created by the state, so it's not a county-led process. The Center for Elections oversees, the creation of these and refining of these processes. So each one has a purpose to confirm that by the end that you get to the end, that it is a ready and properly calibrated, properly set machine and ready to receive electors' vote.
Can you tell us, without going through all 93 steps individually, can you tell us about LNA testing and why it is so important?
LNA testing is important because of many reasons. One, you find out if the machine actually works, that that it hasn't been drawn, that it's in physically good condition, the screen's not messed up. These are all things that you look for. It verifies, the sheet will tell you to verify that the actual correct software is loaded into it. The state has a certified software, and it has version numbers. And these are probably some of the most crucial ones. These are where you set the time to make sure that the date and time are correct. You count the process that I explained earlier of automatically voting the ballot and all of its different combinations. And when you get to the end, if you follow the script, you have a properly calibrated machine that has recorded stuff accurately and you verified it and is ready to be set for election. When you set the machine for election, all totals are reset automatically to 0.
Now, you talked earlier about demonstrative exhibit 1, and we talked about how there would be some sort of a receipt
Correct.
attached. Would that receipt show some of the information that you have just described?
It would.
Okay. Now, so you had a hard time looking at State Election Board Exhibit 1 and understanding what had happened. Was there anything else exclusive to State Election Board Exhibit 1 that made it confusing or misleading?
Only that at a certain point the machine numbers did no longer match up to the touchscreen they belong to. So at that point, going back and auditing these machines becomes difficult because you have to pull them all. And you have to start going through each one to see where and what card was assigned to it actually.
Did you look at State Election Board Exhibits 2 and 3 to try to help you determine what was happening?
I did. There were on State Election Board Exhibit 2 is the recap sheet. And I referred to this to figure out why we were thinking there were 430 votes or something similar to that that were supposed to be on this machine. And after going through this is when I realized that that machine was absolutely not used in the election and that the numbers are off from that point forward. The machine that failed LNA testing and was removed, everything past that point is incorrect.
Inconsistencies between State Exhibit Board 1 and State Exhibit Board 2.
Yes, the DRE 0 numbers would be off by the count numbers. When they're set up into the precinct, each machine is given a count or arbitrarily named, DRE 1. That number matches the number of the machine number that is on the tape. So when you record these, you're recording them by that number. And so since the numbers are off, all the totals would be wrong for the 0 numbers.
Did looking at that document, State Exhibit Board 2, explain to you why Ms. Gallegos might have thought on the phone previously that there were 420 votes on machine card 17?
Yes, because the DRE number that was assigned on this form to 17 had that many recorded for it.
And was that correct?
It was not correct because machine card number 17 was never used. A different card was used in its place on that machine.
Did you refer to State Exhibit Board 3 at all?
I did not.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would move to admit State Exhibit Board 2 into evidence.
Okay.
Admit it.
Now, so the certification form was incomplete and misleading. What happened next?
At this point, the situation was to the point where I felt that state action there needed to be a proper investigation on this matter. So I left the Lowndes County office and went back to my office, informed my supervisor, and he contacted the Secretary of State's office. I wrote a report and submitted that to the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, let me stop you there. Again, we don't do elections 24 hours a day. Why would messed up paperwork lead you to seek an investigation from the State Election Board?
The inconsistencies were greater than just one mistake or two mistakes. It was difficult to tell what had actually happened on election with these machines, and you know that's very disturbing that you can't trace that back immediately. So at that point, I felt that there needed to be some type of investigation.
What happened after that? Did you ever go back to Lowndes County?
I did. I was contacted a couple of weeks later by Steve McBrayer, who was assigned to the case from the IG's office,
IG is what?
Investigator General.
Of the state of Georgia or the Secretary of State's office?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So Steve McBrayer calls you, and then what happens?
He wants me to accompany him down to Lowndes County as the technical person to explain all this as he investigates the issue, and set up the date, December 4th, I believe.
Okay. So what happened when you all returned to Lowndes County?
When we returned, I spent a little time in the morning to explain to Steve what I had found. He wanted to go back over all the things that I had done to find what I did, and then he wanted to move forward from there, which was an investigation of the logs of the DRE units that were used during absentee voting.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you what's been marked as State Election Board Exhibit 5. Do you recognize State Election Board Exhibit 5?
Yes, ma'am. These are logs from the actual DRE, which is the touchscreen unit. These log all actions taken on the machine and the timestamps of those actions.
Okay, now logs, is that the same as an audit log?
It is the same.
Okay.
These are the audit logs for the machines. Every component of the election has a log of some nature, whether it's your optical scan, which takes your paper ballot and scans it. The DRE has its own log, and the GenServer has a log.
Okay. Are those logs for every absentee ballot machine in Lowndes County?
These are not. These are a sampling of random ones that I started to pull.
Okay. Is there any documentation on State Election Board 5 that would tell you which machines you had pulled from?
You don't understand the question?
Well, all right. We'll go back. The first page of State Election Board 5 has a 1. The second page has a 6.
Correct.
The third page has a 17. What does 1, 6, and 17? Those are handwritten numbers. What does 1, 6, and 17 stand for?
I wrote these numbers on these receipts to show what machine that they came from.
So did you pull the audit logs of all the absentee ballot machines?
We pulled a good portion, and we printed up 3.
Okay.
We did not pull all, I think there were 32.
Okay. Should the number of absentee ballot machines that were used in Lowndes County, would they be listed on these
They should be.
Okay, these serial numbers correspond to the absentee ballot machines in Lowndes County.
They do.
State exhibits one, state election board exhibits one. Okay, so you pulled a bunch of them and you printed out 3.
Correct.
At this time, actually, I'm going to break this down. Okay, at this time, I would move to admit state exhibit board state election board exhibit 5 into evidence. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages into evidence.
Objection would be one of the relevance, Your Honor. We know a couple things. This is not complete. This is done at random. Whether it's got anything to do with the case or not, it's not been established, so we object to it this time.
Well, Your Honor, I can ask questions based on them and then move it into evidence, or I can move it into evidence and you can ask the questions. I was just trying to move it into evidence first.
This is an objection pending if you lay a foundation.
Okay. All right. Tell me what State Exhibit Board 5 shows, Election Board 5 shows.
These receipts show all actions taken on the DRE. What I pulled from them and gathered from them is that the LNA testing was not done completely on these units.
Okay. If you can take the first page of Exhibit 5, which has the little handwritten 1 on it, and for purposes of the record, if you could explain how this document shows what you just said.
Essentially, all actions that are taken on this card are recorded. So you can see where the card was downloaded from the server, and then further down the list, you can see where the system was turned on. It gives an explanation of what election this is, what machine this is, what precinct it's placed into. And then you can see where all the actions were taken on it for LNA. In between where the machine is turned on and the actions that were taken, there is a step that is missing that would indicate that the machine had been through LNA testing.
Is that what is reflected on the other 8 pages of State Election Board Exhibit 5?
It is.
Okay. And those were all printed from absentee ballot machines at Lowndes County after the November 8th election,
That's
4th election.
That is correct.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit State Election Board Exhibit 5.
No objection, Your Honor.
Submit.
Okay, now I would like to show you what I'm going to mark as State Election Board Exhibit 6. And I need to not have any more exhibits because I don't have any more stickers. Do you recognize State Election Board Exhibit 6?
I do.
Can you state what State Election Board Exhibit 6 is?
This is an audit log that I took from a machine that I did a proper LNA test to show a comparison of what the tape should look like versus what the tapes did look like. This is a tape indicating all the steps that are done in a proper LNA. To complete this, I, under the observation of Steve McBrayer, took the Lowndes County instruction form for doing LNA testing, which is what the state provided, and I followed each step of that instruction form and then printed out the audit log to show what the log should look like in comparison to the one that was done. I did this to show that the first ones were not done properly.
Okay, and for purposes of the record, can you go through and explain what the difference is between State Election Board Exhibit 6 and what you're going to see throughout State Election Board Exhibit 5?
Sure. The top information is essentially the same, where the card is downloaded from the machine to the card. The card is inserted into a machine, the system turns on. The first action that is to be taken during LNA is the supervisor card is to be entered. That action card gets you to the administrative mode that I spoke about earlier, the one where you do the printer test, the calibration, the core making the hardware ready, not the software side. This just checks that it's actually functioning. That's where this is accomplished. And you will see where supervisor card is inserted. And then the following steps tend to follow along what is here. The one that is the most different is the supervisor card was inserted, which was not on the other ones. And that's what led me to believe that the LNA was not done properly, because you can't get to the back end without that supervisor card.
At this time, I would move to admit state election board exhibit 6 into evidence.
No objection.
Admit it.
Okay. Now, if the state election board, if these absentee ballot machines had been, the LNA testing had been filled out, excuse me, if the LNA testing had been done correctly and the paperwork had been done correctly, would Ms. Gallegos been able to check out all these columns that are unchecked on state election board exhibit 1?
She would.
Okay. Would all these columns on state election board exhibit 1 correspond to state election board exhibit 6, a correctly done LNA test?
There are a couple that would be inferred that are not correctly logged. They are logged by the supervisor card being entered into the system, would infer that you went in and set the time, you calibrated the machine, and you tested the printer and card reader. Every action past that point on this list would be verified in here.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, what wasn't done? What does State Exhibit 5 show that was not done?
That the LNA was not completed properly. Probably the most important part of LNA was not completed. It's the calibrating of the touch screen, the making sure that the time and date is correct, testing the printer, and testing the card reader. Those are the core functions of what a voting unit does. You know, the time and date being set correctly makes the audits correct, makes the audit log correct. You'll see in some of these logs where the timestamps are incorrect. They're set for the wrong time, or even some of them are the wrong date. That would verify that everything is in order.
Okay. So you said time and date stamps. You told us why that's important. Calibration, you already told us why that was important. What were the other two things that weren't done, and why were they important?
Testing of the printer will just make sure that the printer actually works. The printer will is what the receipts are printed on election night. The totals for posting in the precinct is also where we can print any of the logs or any of that information. The card reader is the actual card. If you voted in Georgia, you know they give you a card, a little yellow card that you stick into the machine. It has your ballot information on it. You know, that verifies, that test verifies that it can read cards. And
based on what State Exhibit 5 shows, State Election Board Exhibit 5 shows, and the absence of anything in State Election Board 1, actually, scratch that. If, given what State Election Board 5 indicates, or doesn't indicate, did the testing indicate that the vote registers were set at 0?
yes, on everything but machine 17.
Okay. Did you ever look at machine 17 to figure out why that one didn't have the vote register set at 0?
I did.
Okay. Is that included in State Election Board Exhibit 5?
It is. The audit log is in there.
Okay, can you explain what, I think it's about, let's just explain which page it is for the record.
starts at page 3.
Page 3. Can you explain specifically what the audit log for a state election board exhibit for machine 17 shows?
Which exhibit again?
Exhibit 5, page 3, which is the audit log for machine 17, and it has a handwritten 17 on the top of it.
Essentially, what this shows is that the audit log shows that the card was placed into the machine. The automatic LNA was ran, so there was no supervisor card inserted into this machine to go into the backside of configuring the machine, and that it had an issue. I apologize, that is not in here. It says that a test report was printed. When I verified that against the machine maintenance report, which was the reason, we found out that the machine was sent in for repair because the printer broke. So at this point, when it was printing this report, it broke. I had the supervisor function. If you went into the supervisor function as the instructions state and did the test printer, it would have printed the test then, and it would have broke then, before any votes were ever placed on this card.
I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Long, what is your education?
My education, I have a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Information Systems from Kennesaw State University. I've completed some secondary certifications during my time in DC.
What are those additional
A+
certifications?
certification. A+
What are those
certification.
additional certifications?
A+ certification, sir.
I'm sorry.
It's called A+ certification. It's a computer certification that deals with learning how to troubleshoot and diagnose issues with computers in general. It's a general overview.
And when did you take your bachelor's degree?
My bachelor's degree was completed, I guess 2 years ago.
Have you done academic work past the bachelor's degree?
I have not started my master's yet.
And how long have you been involved as a computer engineer?
For whom?
How long have you been a computer engineer?
It would depend on how you define that term. My title is computer engineer. I've been under for almost a year now at my current position.
What was your title at Kennesaw?
Systems administrator.
Now, apparently you feel that you were able to give an opinion that this machine would have broken had something been done to it that wasn't done to it.
Objection, Your Honor. We are not calling him as an expert witness for his opinions. He has testified as to facts, and we have documents to back up it. I would object to the form of that question.
Well, he made the statement that this would have broken when they put the supervisor card in, which was never done. So he's given an opinion as to when this would have broken if something had happened that didn't happen.
Your Honor, if we're going to use that as the definition for opinion, then everything we take as testimony today, and in every case, will be opinion. He has given the facts. He is a fact witness, and I object to the form of the question.
No, you've not called him as an expert witness, correct?
Correct.
So whether or not he gives his opinion or not, since he's not an expert, it would be of little value to me. It would be, I shouldn't say it that way. It would be compared to any other witness either side puts up.
Right. But I feel
with no particular emphasis being given to that testimony.
he just made a statement that had something been done that wasn't done, it would have broken at that time. So I felt like I was entitled to test that statement.
But I think you are. He's on cross-examination. He made the statement. But he's not been qualified as an expert witness, if that's of any help to you. You certainly are permitted to cross-examine on anything that was brought up on direct.
But that was your statement, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
And you stating that as a matter of fact or as a matter of opinion? It was broken, something that's been done that wasn't done.
Objection to the form of the question.
What specifically is the objection?
Again, Your Honor, I have not called him as an expert. Mr. Bright is trying to turn this into some sort of expert cross-examination, which is inappropriate since he's not an expert. If Mr. Bright wants to cross-examine him as to his statements, impeach his credibility, that is one thing. To turn him into a witness of such stature that he is not appropriate.
What's your legal objection to the form of the question?
My legal objection to the form of the question is inappropriate to ask a fact witness what their legal opinion of it is in this case.
Well, I'll tell you what, if he's not an expert, if he didn't give an opinion, and he's not an opinion witness, then I'd just like to move to strike that statement that he made about what might have happened or what would have happened if something was done that wasn't done. Because if he's just a fact witness, he shouldn't have said that.
Objection, Your Honor. There are certainly other ways to cross-examine someone besides asking inappropriate questions to that witness. One could
He's
say,
moved to strike the opinion statement that was given. Do you want to respond to his motion?
yes, Your Honor, I would object to that. I don't think we have any testimony. We're taking this, he's saying it's an opinion statement. I'm arguing he can't ask that question, and then he's saying, well, because I can't ask that question, then we should move to strike. All I'm saying is, don't cross-examine in an inappropriate manner. Cross-examine him on the statement in an appropriate manner.
Would you respond to his motion to strike the opinion statement?
I respectfully disagree with my colleague's motion to strike. I would ask that the statement remain in the record and that we simply cross-examine it in a more appropriate manner.
You haven't given me a reason why I should not grant his motion.
Because he's not an opinion witness.
But he's made an opinion statement. So
If that is a characterization, suddenly we've gotten to this conclusion. We haven't asked an
well,
appropriate...
let me indicate, I don't disagree that the statement made was an opinion. It clearly was his opinion that the machine would have broken had the test been properly ran. The printer would have broken at the time of the test rather than at the time of the election. That clearly was his statement. It was his opinion that it would have broken. It clearly was an opinion. The question is whether or not it should be stricken from the record or not.
Well, Your Honor, if we want to cross-examine him as to the basis for why he made that statement, that seems an appropriate way to handle this situation. When one makes a statement,
Can you tell me why a lay witness's, perhaps you can you tell me why a lay witness's opinion is permissible?
I'm not suggesting that, I am taking issue with the conclusion that this is an expert opinion. I'm simply asking that he cross-examine.
That's the point. Since he's not qualified as an expert, can you tell me, and maybe you can you tell me why a lay witness, which is what he would be, he's not an expert, why a lay witness's opinion is permissible?
Well, he investigated the machine. He was there at the scene. He went through the documents. He printed out another document that shows you what it should have looked like. And so, based on that, he is giving his understanding of what happened.
I guess, Counsel, I'm a little confused as to why you, I guess, would not have called him as or attempted to qualify him as an expert witness, since you're clearly relying on, and you want the court to rely on his opinions related to what should have taken place in this case. And clearly only an expert would be able to offer that sort of testimony, since neither you nor I, and I'm guessing your opposing counsel, have specific knowledge about the election DRE equipment process. So it would require somebody to want me to rely on his opinions related to what should have taken place.
Well, Your Honor, I expected that the fact that we were backing up his testimony with documents, because he was a fact witness on the scene. Typically, a fact witness is someone who can testify because he was there, and an expert witness is someone who comes in, brought in for the purpose of litigation, to give his opinion.
It's clear that he can't testify as a fact witness as to what occurred, but what you take an additional step is to offer his opinion as to why what the defendant has done was improper and how we know that.
Your Honor, I have given you documents that show the differences. I've given you a series of facts that show the problems. I feel like you started...
I'm going to grant the motion to strike the one statement that was mainly related to the printing error. It's clearly an opinion. It can only be offered, I believe, through an expert witness in control. The rest of his testimony stands.
Mr. Long, you received a call from Laura Gallegos shortly after the election, did you not?
That's my recollection.
And she reported problems uploading this card 17.
That's correct.
And you walked her through that over the telephone and told her how to fix it, or go about it.
That's correct.
And she did exactly what you told her to do.
That's correct.
Then the next call you got was around the 21st or so of November, after the returns had been certified.
Correct.
Right? Because the election was on the 4th, the returns were certified around the 7th, something like that.
Correct.
And at that time, Ms. Cox asked for your help because they were making errors and uploading their cards.
It was to resolve election night issues. Those are usually handled a couple of weeks after certification. We're not allowed to touch any of the equipment during the certification process unless...
And you went on the 24th and found that they were removing the memory cards too quickly, and that was causing them not to malfunction, the machines to malfunction.
No, sir, that's not my testimony.
There wasn't a problem with that, removing the cards too quickly?
No, sir, I do not understand. I do not...
All right, excuse me just a minute. Well, rather than take the time here, I'll get back to that. But you went back on when you went on the 24th, you asked to see these documents that you've seen today, like SEB 1, 2, and 3.
Yes, sir.
All right. And SEB 1 was incomplete.
That's correct.
The boxes, some of the boxes weren't checked.
That's correct.
Right? The initials were not on the form.
That's correct.
This writing at the bottom, whatever that is, wasn't on there.
That's correct.
What about these two columns on the right where date sealed and initials inspected?
They were not correct. They were not present, and in their current form, they are not correct. Because this would state that they were sealed on election day. They were actually used before.
They were actually sealed before the election. Right.
That's correct.
Back in September when they were checked.
That's correct.
And that was when they found out that this 117 machine, or the one that had 17 card in it, broke
That's correct.
during the test, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
So Laura was performing a test on the machine when it broke. Is that right?
She was performing the last part of the test when
Right.
it broke.
And as a matter of fact, it was her performing of this test that caused it to when it broke, and that's how they discovered it's bad.
In that form, that would be correct.
But somebody forgot, or didn't take the machine out of the lineup. Isn't that what happened?
It appears that way, yeah.
So we have the broke machine, it's in the warehouse, but it's still on the list.
Correct.
So when they, on election night, when whoever was tabulating the results, they put in a figure that was wrong because the machine wasn't there. Didn't receive any votes.
That's correct.
And they ascribed some votes to the machine.
Ascribe, sir?
They allocated some votes to this machine.
And the form of the I think I know your intent of the question. But
On election night, it was reported that this machine recorded some votes.
That's correct.
When it didn't record any votes.
All it had was non-real elected votes on it.
Let me see if I understand. There is machine number 18,
There is,
and
and
it should have gone from
19
16 to 18 without 17 being included on the list. Is that right?
It depends on the process that they take. They are allowed to place that card in the next machine, in the list, and continue, because the card was not bad itself.
Is the list typically in numerical order by machine?
It is typical.
So it would likely have been maybe 18 out of it.
If they would have skipped the card and removed the card from the election process, yes, it would have skipped, so card 18 would have just went into the next machine. If they moved the card down to the next machine, then the machine number should have been removed from the list.
So if 17 had been removed from the list, would any of this have occurred? I mean,
Not,
so
so
it
that's my.
was the machine that was being included in the list is what sort of resulted in these numbers being improperly reported.
Yes, I mean, the sheet, the way it appears is the sheet was filled
Let me
out.
ask it another way. If 17 hadn't been on the list, would the Secretary of State ever become aware and the State Election Board that there was 947 votes improperly included?
That they would have not been aware, because it
It
would have been
wouldn't have
uploaded, yeah.
And by the same token, the 947 votes wouldn't have been recorded, would it?
I'm sorry?
If the 17 card hadn't been put into this machine that it wasn't in the lineup, then the votes wouldn't have been recorded.
Objection.
I'm not sure of the question you're asking, I'm sorry.
If we could be a little more specific.
You rephrase? He doesn't. He appears not to understand the question.
Had somebody not taken this test vote card with 947 votes on it and put it in one of the machines, then the discrepancy would not have occurred.
If it would not have tried to been uploaded on election night, that is correct.
And all that could have been prevented by whoever was doing the tabulations just marking through this machine it wasn't there.
From better documentation, yes, all this could have been avoided.
And this, where's the exhibit you had that showed about when the 17 cards was? Forgotten the number. No, it's a lot of.
This is the 17 card.
I think.
What I'm thinking about here about.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
it means 4. Yeah.
Exhibit 4, excuse me. Show me on right, where are
It would be right here at the bottom. So this is machine 17. That was the computer they used to upload it. It's a relative, and that's the number about.
That's that exhibit 4 again. What is that?
The GM's log, election night log.
And what is the time of that? So it's,
1939.
39 minutes after 7 p.m.
Yeah, I was in the military, yes.
Remember what it was?
I believe so.
So at 7:39, the 17 card was uploaded into the machine.
Per this log, yes, sir.
And we know now that that would include the 947 non-votes or test votes
That's correct.
that weren't cast in the election.
That's correct.
And that was exactly the discrepancy between the number of voters who registered to vote and the number of votes that were cast.
Yes, that would be correct.
I mean, you looked at it, that as part of the investigation, didn't you?
That was handled by the Secretary of State's office to notice that they are the ones who noticed the discrepancy at the state level, that the number of people voted was less than the number of votes cast.
And isn't that pretty basic information? I mean, isn't that right readily available to anybody who knows what they're looking at?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Response?
Well, let me talk, we'll go into more detail now. How do you find out how many people voted?
The voter registration system.
Is that in the package that's sent up to the Secretary of State?
It is.
And how do you know how many votes were counted?
It's through the canvassing process. You take your registers from your precinct and the ones from your absentee votes.
And is that total sent up to the Board of Elections or Secretary of State?
It is.
So when the Superintendent of Elections in Lowndes County, Georgia, compares the votes cast with the votes counted, they should be the same, shouldn't they?
They should.
And that's, all it requires is looking at the votes cast, which is in the package, and the votes counted, which is in the package.
That would be correct.
And then, doesn't the election law require that the superintendent certify that that's been done, and that everything balances?
Objection, he's asking a question of law.
This is a pretty knowledgeable man here about election laws and practices and regulations. He's testified about testing the proper way to test what the Secretary of State requires by way of.
Repeat your question, please.
Yes. And doesn't the election law require the superintendent to certify that that superintendent has compared those two numbers, people that voted, votes counted, to make sure they're the same? Isn't that part of the package that's sent up?
Oh, well.
I'm sorry, sir.
Oh, well.
It is to be signed and certified that Friday,
Right.
not at the time that this discrepancy was found.
Was the answer yes? Now, and at the time, have you looked at this, what was sent up to the Secretary of State?
No, that does not go through our office.
That wasn't part of your investigation?
That is not part of my investigation.
Did you come down on the 1st of December and assist in the investigation with Mr. Steve McBrayer, is it?
That's correct.
And he was from where? Who's he work
The IG's office is Inspector General's office.
for? Oh, the Secretary of State?
I'm not sure. I don't know the hierarchy there.
But you assisted him in the
Yes,
investigation?
the technical side of the investigation.
And you didn't, in the course of that, look at what was sent up?
Did not.
And you never looked at it to see if it balanced, if it didn't balance?
I was told by the Secretary of State's office that it did not balance. I worked directly for them. I had to take them at their word.
Who did you give this state's SCB?
The larger one.
Yeah, the big one.
Did that.
Did we put that on the bench on?
This one, I think it's on the podium, it's on the podium.
Oh, here it is. Sorry. SCB one. Who did you ask, who did you give this to and ask him to get it fixed, get it completed?
I do not recall it. It would have either been Deb Cox or it was probably Deb Cox. I don't remember. I was just in the room and handed it to the person I was talking to.
And who brought it back to you in the form that it's in now?
I believe it was Deb Cox who handed it to me.
And what is her position?
She's the election supervisor.
Now,
That's supervisor is different than superintendent.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. In different counties, they call it different things.
That's the same
Depending on the board, if there is a board, it is a superintendent. If it's not a board, sometimes they're called a supervisor. I apologize. It is the same title.
When you were referring to the logs, the audit logs, and you indicated you were able to tell that there was no supervisor on SED 5, and then you ran SED 6 the proper way.
Correct.
If there is a supervisor listed, is it actually because they put in their card? Does it actually tell you on the log who that person is?
No, sir. All supervisor cards are essentially the same. They are not the supervisor's card. What a supervisor card essentially is, they changed the name from administrator card back before 2004 or something, somewhere to that. I don't recall. It's just a title of the card. It gives you elevated privileges on the machine. It allows
So
you.
you don't actually know who did the testing. You just know that somebody that had a card with access, supervisor access.
That's correct.
That
That's correct.
Is there such thing as an automatic test?
Yes.
And is it a manual test as well?
Yes.
Now, would you explain to us what a manual test is?
In the context or of a manual vote or the manual.
In the context of the L&A
Okay.
test?
All things up to the point of where this column, I guess you count the first one, 1, 2, 3, 4. Up to column 10, if you count the first column. So the first 9 steps are all manual operations. These are operations that you have to do by hand. They cannot be completed in an automatic way. The automatic test is a single button that you press that once again goes through the algorithm and casts all the different combinations of that ballot to make sure that it can record accurately within all those positions.
Now, the first 10 steps, were they done on these machines that you looked at?
They were not.
And what about the rest of them? Was the automatic test run?
That's correct.
So the automatic test was run on all machines that you looked at?
That's correct.
Now, this card number 17, it was put in late at 7:39. Did you find who did that?
No, there's no wasted time.
Did you ask anybody? You didn't ask who put this card in?
No, it's not within my investigation.
Well, that's what caused the problem.
That's what caused the investigation.
I mean, that's what you were investigating, wasn't it? How we got out of sync by 947 votes.
That is the first purpose of coming on, yes.
And that was created by putting that card in after the rest of them had already been put in.
That was correct.
Wasn't it pertinent, in your opinion, to find out who did that?
This is an administrative issue. I mean, my job was to do the technical work to figure out technically what went wrong and turn it over to the supervisor or superintendent.
So you don't know who did it?
No, that's not within my job.
Now, suppose you had this card sitting there somewhere with 947 test votes on it. It's not in election mode, right?
Correct.
So it's just pre-election mode.
Correct.
And here you are on election night at 7:39 p.m. whatever. If you went to put that in the machine, would the machine take those votes?
Objection calls for speculation.
Or
Yes, the machine would allow those votes.
is that a flaw in the machine?
It cannot be classified as a flaw, per se.
Well,
I don't feel that I have the ability to state flaws of the voting system.
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. I think we're getting back into opinion testimony.
what?
More important, she's referring to opinion testimony. More importantly, I don't know what the relevance is. It's the same.
Well, Your Honor, what I'd I'd like to investigate who this man who's read Monda's about it is, well, okay, excuse me, I'll go on where I was going. So, even though this card was in pre-election mode and had on it only test ballots, the machine, after the election and counting up the election votes, would count these ballots along with the real ones, right?
That's correct.
And it wouldn't be any warning to the operator saying pre-test mode, or
The process,
are you sure you want to do this or something?
if I may, the process of uploading an election card, there's two ways to do it. One, you insert the card into the machine, you turn on the machine, and it comes up to a screen of whatever mode that it's in. So immediately you would know that it was in pre-election mode because you have all these buttons. On post-election mode, you only have 3 buttons.
All right.
The other way to do it is to do what's called an accumulation mode, where you are allowed to stick in multiple cards from the same precinct, and they will buffer into the machine and load into the machine, and they can be uploaded all at once from that same precinct.
Okay.
So, to answer your question, if you place the card into the machine, just the single card, you would know because it would not be the correct screen. There would only, typically in post-election, there would only be 3 buttons, where in pre-election, I think there's like 10 or 12 buttons. You would need.
And you know, excuse me, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I was going to finish that. In accumulation mode, if you place a card into the accumulator that is different from any other card, it will kick all the other cards out.
Okay.
So if you've loaded 2 absentee cards and you put in another absentee card that's in pre-election mode, it will knock all those other ones out.
Thank you.
Which tells you
Now-
what?
I'm sorry?
Which tells you what?
Which tells you that the card does not match the other ones and that you should look into it. I mean,
Now, your previous testimony, I think, was that card 17 was uploaded separately from all the others. So would that indicate to you if it was done, which method was used?
it would have to have been either the only card stuck into the accumulator or it was done just by itself.
So it still could have been accumulator.
Yes, it can,
Just
so long
the
as you
one.
did not put any other. And per the log, the precinct before it was Mount Pleasant Church. So, I mean, at that point, it would have been the only card in the accumulator.
So if it's put in by itself, then it would show on the screen pre-election mode.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
It would, so whoever was putting it in would know these are not real votes, these are test votes.
They should recognize that.
All right, and then can that operator override that then and put them in anyway?
Well, there's not an override. It would accept them just by, if there would be no override from the system. If they decide to go against what they're seeing, then yes, but there would be no more.
So the person putting in the votes would be told pre-election mode, i.e. test votes, but to go right ahead and put them in anyway.
Correct. If they are in that single card mode, in the accumulator mode,
And from your investigation, that'd be what happened.
it was uploaded separately. And you cannot tell whether it was uploaded in accumulation mode or regular.
Either way, because it was uploaded separately, that pre-election information will come up on the screen, correct?
No, it should not. The screen is different. It's not as nearly as obvious that it loads that way. I had a touch screen to demonstrate, but there should be indication, yeah. But it's not.
In
It's
the
readily.
cumulative mode, it would also.
I'm sorry.
You said in the cumulative mode, it would also.
It
if
should
was,
be
if it
apparent.
was the only card.
Yeah, it should be apparent. So,
And I think you told us you did not inquire, find out who put that card in on election night, et cetera.
I did not inquire. Our office doesn't investigate the staff issues.
When you came down to do this investigation, did you speak to Laura?
I did not.
Now, the testing, I think, that you were saying that was not done back in September.
Correct.
We know some testing was done on these one of the machines,
We know that, yes,
but some of the steps that are possible to do were not done.
that's correct.
And I think it's your testimony that somebody at the state election board, something has a manual that tells you how that should be done.
That is correct.
Did you ever find out what Laura was given to work with?
No, once again, we don't investigate staff issues.
So we don't
Our
know what
office does not.
she had to work with.
Right. That's why the SEB was notified, because the IG's office has the authority to investigate staff issues.
Now, the testing, I think you said it's not done, was calibration,
That would be correct.
printer,
Correct.
time and date,
Correct.
card reader. That's a voter card reader.
That would be correct.
But none of those problems had anything to do with discrepancy of 947 votes.
Not correct.
This problem was caused when somebody put in card 17 and ignored the fact that it said it's a test card and put it in anyway. That's what created this problem.
That would be a very,
Thanks.
Counsel, I did not announce in the beginning that we'll be completing each witness on redirect, so I want to make sure you get all your cross-examination on this witness and the other witness.
All right, thank you.
Any redirect?
Please. Mr. Long. Okay, let's start with the most recent testimony. We were talking about accumulation versus regular uploading. Is that a fair term, two fair terms?
in the sense we can consider those terms. There's no real proper term except for the accumulator, because it has a name, accumulator.
Okay.
There's no normal practice. It's whatever the county feels safe or best in doing.
Okay, maybe we should call it accumulator versus non-accumulator.
Perfect. That would be better.
If you could just restate what you would see versus non-accumulating card 17 versus accumulating card 17 and card 17 alone.
Non-accumulating mode, when you place the card into the unit, you turn on the unit, it will load that single card. So it will come up in whatever mode that it was last in. When it does that, in pre-election mode, there are, like I said, approximately 12 buttons from what I recall. And that would be much different than any other screen. It's the only screen that looks that way. So that would be non-accumulating mode. Accumulating mode is essentially a window that has blank spots, and these spots is for like the ID and stuff. It pulls all that from the card, like the precinct name and all that. So it's like a bucket you would place it into. So when you place the card into it, the ID comes up, what precinct it is, and then it will load the card and show you the machine.
Do you see whether it's in pre-election or election mode if it's being loaded via accumulation?
That's the part that I'm unsure about. I hesitate to say, I've already semi-hesitated to say that it does or does not. My recollection is that it does. I'm unsure
Okay.
without seeing it.
Does State Election Board Exhibit 4, where it shows that the card 17 was loaded separately, does it show which way it was loaded?
It does not.
Okay, now let's get back, going back to the testing, which would have been done in September. We had this supervisor card, which is a term that is unconnected to the term supervisor that an employee might have.
That's correct.
Okay. So, can you please re-explain what the supervisor card does that is different from what our card that is eventually going to hold votes does?
The supervisor card is not a memory card. It looks nothing like that. It's a thin card about the size of your driver's license that has a chip in it. And on that chip is where the supervisor code is stored. That will allow the machine to go to that higher level of testing. So that is inserted actually through the card reader. It's not on the side of the machine where the memory card would be placed.
Okay, so it's not even inserted in the same place.
No.
And the supervisor card, what does the supervisor card allow you to do? You said something about a higher level of testing.
It allows you to get into all higher level activities. It allows you to get into the audit logs. It allows you to get into the election archive, which will show you all the elections that were done on that machine. It will allow you to calibrate the machine, set the time and day, test the printer, the serial port.
Now, please, if I'm not going to get to recross this witness, I'm going to ask that it redirect, be limited to what was covered in the cross. This is new territory. We did.
Your Honor, we did discuss the supervisor card both in direct and on cross-examination. There was discussion as to the powers the supervisor card has. I do believe this is not new territory. So I would...
It may not be new, it came up that clearly was covered on direct. He went specifically through, I think, all of the functions that were left out regarding the supervisor log, supervisor card.
Well, if Your Honor doesn't feel the need to hear this testimony, I certainly will not go forward. Okay, moving on. On cross-examination, it was covered that Laura did, Ms. Gallegos did do some of the testing.
That's correct.
What is the testing she did versus the testing she didn't do?
The testing that she did essentially was to turn on the unit, insert the memory card, press the automatic LNA button, and then press the print button.
And you testified on cross-examination that that much testing did show that machine 17 was broken.
Now, the report that she wrote that said that it was broken, it shows that it printed, but the manufacturing, the form that they fill out for repair says that the printer broke.
Okay. And so the hardware included the calibration and the time and date and all the things we've discussed. Okay. And the software would be what?
Would be the automatic LNA, the automatic testing part. It's where that suite of algorithms ran to test all the parts of the electronic ballot.
Okay. So if the algorithm, the votes, the test votes, the pre-election votes?
That's correct.
Okay, so if the software was run, testing was done, then why did machine card 17 still have 947 votes on it? In pre-election
Because
votes?
it broke during the printing stage, and the machine was turned off. It was never sent for election, or the totals were never cleared from the card.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is this witness excused?
I have no further need of them.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. If you come or go as you please.
My next witness would be Steve McGrayer.
Counsel, as indicated in the beginning, Mr. Bright has raised a jurisdictional issue as to whether or not the board can bring an action against his client. So to the extent that you can order your witnesses to address those factual concerns first, I would appreciate that, because in fact the board doesn't have jurisdiction. There's no point in calling the rest of your witnesses.
Okay. Actually, Mr. McGrayer, if you can leave and if we can call Deborah Cox, please.
Not leave permanently, just. Do you understand my concern? Or my rationale?
I do. I guess I sort of assumed that I'd put up my case and then we, but that's fine. That's certainly acceptable.
You swear or affirm the testimony without giving us any I'll do it.
Good morning. Can you state your name, please?
Deb Cox.
And Ms. Cox, what is your position?
Supervisor of elections for Lyons County
Okay. And how long have you had that position?
since 1995.
Okay. And whom do you report to?
I report to the Board of Elections.
Okay. How many people are on the Board of Elections?
3.
Was Laura Gallegos employed by the Board of Elections?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us when she came to work for the Board of Elections?
I don't remember the exact date.
Okay. Do you know within a few years?
No, I don't know really.
Okay. Well, she had been, what was her position, what were her job duties well, let me ask you this. I'm going to mark state election board exhibits 7 and 8. Do you recognize State Election Board 7? Exhibit 7.
Yes.
What is State Election Board 7?
It's the official permanent oath given to persons working in the elections office.
Okay. What is that an oath for Ms. Gallegos?
Yes, it is.
Okay, what is the date of that?
18 October 2006.
Okay. So we know she was working in the elections office at least from 2006 forward.
Yes.
Okay. And what is State Election Board Exhibit 8?
Job description for elections technician,
Okay. Is there a date on that?
June 2006.
Okay. Was that something that was given to Ms. Gallegos?
Yes.
Okay. So we know at least from 2006 forward, she was under oath as an election technician and these were her job duties.
Yes.
Now, can you describe to me the manner in which she was, how did she come to be hired in your office?
We had a job opening. We advertised. We selected a number of people to interview, and she was selected as the person to hire.
Okay, did you go through chain of command and get the authority of the board to hire her?
Yes.
Okay. Was she paid?
Yes.
Okay. And who determined her salary?
Lyons County.
What? Now, at this time, I'd like to move State Election Board Exhibit 7 and 8 into evidence.
Objection to 7, Your Honor. There's no provision in the election code for that. The election code refers to an oath that is prescribed by the Secretary of State, and in the rules, there's such an oath verbatim. That's not what this is. So, this is not an oath prescribed by or relevant to the election code. The one in the election code calls for you to do before each election.
Your Honor, that would be an objection to the sufficiency of the evidence.
What's the relevance of 7?
Well,
I'm guessing 7 is the oath for election technicians?
that is the oath that Ms. Gallegos took, yes.
Okay.
In 2006.
Yes.
Is that the same oath as the oath of custodians and deputy custodians?
Well, I'm going to ask Ms. Cox about that.
That's the objection, so you could do that foundation as to what's relevant about that.
Okay, Ms. Cox, is this State Exhibit Board 7, this oath, let me start this way. Did Ms. Gallegos take any other oaths while she was employed with you?
I'm going to overrule the objection and let the record, because I think it's relevant either way. It's the oath that was actually given. Your argument might be that it's not the custodian or deputy custodian oath, and then that might help your case, but I'll admit it.
Okay, Ms. Cox, Exhibit 7, is there another oath besides Exhibit 7 that Ms. Gallegos took while she worked for you all.
Yes, all employees are given an oath upon hiring.
Okay. So this was a secondary oath.
Yes.
Okay. Was Ms. Gallegos given an oath before every election?
No.
Why not?
The Board of Elections, the three-person board that oversees the elections office, decided that oath was not of sufficient quality.
Which oath?
The oath of custodian is listed there.
Was she
They-
ever given that oath?
No. They took that
Sergeant
oath.
Counsel?
Sir, I would move to strike this 7. This is not the oath, it's called.
How about a better motion?
I'm sorry.
How about a better motion? The premise of your whole argument is that this client of yours was not a custodian or deputy custodian authorized under the statute, and she just indicated your client was never given the oath. So what is your motion based upon?
To dismiss.
Granted. I'm assuming there's no other way we can legally establish that she was authorized under the statute, because the statute only applies to custodians and deputy custodians.
Well, Your Honor, I was hoping to get a little more testimony regarding,
She testified that she was never given the oath.
well, you're asking me a question and I'm trying to answer it, which is that I was hoping to get a little more information out of her. I'm not
What
disputing.
else could she give except she was never given an oath? Which means she was not an authorized custodian or deputy custodian.
Well, I could ask her why she wasn't given.
Why would I care? Either she was or was not a custodian or deputy custodian authorized under law. And your own regulation, your board's own regulation has an oath that's required to be given, it's required to be signed by the deputy custodian, administered, sworn as described by the superintendent. She's indicated that never happened, so this person clearly was never an authorized custodian, deputy custodian, and that's the only person that the statute would apply to.
Well, Your Honor, I'm not disputing what the law says, nor am I disputing what my witness just stated. I'm simply saying that there may be more to this situation, but if Your Honor is not interested in hearing any more evidence, then we will go back to Atlanta.
If she's not authorized, then how would your client have the authority to reprimand her or impose any sanctions against him?
Well, I'd like to ask Ms. Cox how she was authorized.
She can only be authorized under the statute, the way the statute says you're authorized to take an oath.
Well, I would like to ask Ms. Cox why the board departed from the statute and chose this
Why
oath.
would I care why the board failed to follow the law?
Your Honor, I'm simply presenting the case and the evidence, and if Your Honor has already ruled,
Thank
and
you.
I am not disputing that, and I guess we'll all go back to Atlanta.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You can release the rest of the witnesses.
Yes, sir.
Daniel,
Sí. Porque nunca fue investigada ni nada.
Ms. Gallegos' objections, her arguments as to what happened on the night of the election were not relevant to what had happened in terms of the training, and that you would.
That would all go to the election law, alleged violations, right? All
The secondary stuff, yes, but we were expecting to show the testimony that we had regarding what the oath was, why it had been changed, who had changed it, how that had happened, and what the ramifications within the code are for failing to give the oath.
And this oath, the actual oath is part of the board's rules, it's not in the statute, right?
There's no statutory oath that I can find. I've been looking for one.
Yeah. The board itself promulgated a rule. Subparagraph G of, as you presented in your matters asserted. Rule 183-1-12-.02. And I don't know which paragraphs the way they have them numbered, but
Yeah, they
ends up
don't make it
being-
easy.
ends up being G, voting system handling requirements, number 1, and then it has the oath in there.
Okay, well, I believe if you compared the oath in the rules and the oath which was given, as Ms. Cox stated, the oath was certainly, there's a lot of, the language tracks it. if not, sort of increases on it and places a higher burden on the person taking the oath, higher expectations.
Person giving or taking.
Well, the oath, so here we go.
Statute that you referred to that provided a criminal penalty was not present.
I'm sorry, that was 584, I think.
To be clear, my ruling is indicates that the state election board does not have jurisdiction over the defendant, inasmuch as she was not an authorized custodian or deputy custodian under the statute, inasmuch as she has not been provided the regulatorily required and statutorily required oath of office.
Well, Your Honor, if I could just finish what I was stating, the oath in the rule says that I will faithfully perform all my duties in accordance with state law, and I will use the best of my endeavors to prevent any fraud, deceit, or abuse in carrying out the duties, and I am not disqualified by law. And this says, it tracks that fraud, deceit, or abuse language, and then it includes, I will at all times truly, impartially, and faithfully perform my duties therein to the best of my judgment and ability, only in confidentiality regarding technology and voter information both during and after my employment, and I will support the Constitution of Georgia and the Constitution of the United States. So, is this word for word the oath that's in subsection G? It is not, but it is tracks the language and then improves upon it. I don't believe that that divests us of jurisdiction, and I don't believe that the statutes indicate that it would divest us of jurisdiction.
Well, the reason that I disagree with you is the statute is very specific. It indicates in subsection B, 21-379.6, that the last sentence of that subsection is the custodian and deputy custodians. I'm sorry. Each custodian shall take an oath of office prepared by the Secretary of State before each primary election, which shall be filed with the superintendent. That's clearly a requirement in order to be an authorized custodian under the statute. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Can we
I
make,
would still like the exhibits that were tendered as part of my record.
okay, can we make copies of this and return the originals back to the Lowndes County Board?
Is there a comment?
There's a copier machine up